Hey, welcome to On the Other Hand. This is just a little public service announcement that we wanted to make. We're 2 months into this podcast, been taking different topics over the course of each week. But as we've been looking at this, we're recognizing we think it's probably better if we bring once a month content to you. And here's the reason. It gives us the time to prepare so that when we bring this podcast, we've got guests lined up. We've got all of our ducks in a row. We feel like it'll be more impactful that way. And then from time to time, we may have bonus episodes that happen in between those, depending on what the topic is or availability of guests that we want to bring on to discuss topics. But we want to let you know that we are moving into a once a month model with some supplemental bonus features from time to time in the middle of that. And so that is going to begin with this podcast and then moving forward from here.
Awesome. And we're going to be diving deep into a new subject for us here in the next few podcasts, the subject of adoption.
Yep.
And so looking forward to that. And of course, we hope that the content here is valuable for you, engaging, and answers your questions if you have questions. And so we hope that you'll subscribe to this channel, hope that you'll like it, and if it's a value, that you'll share it with as many people as you can and get the word out there. But in the meantime, we just really hope that you enjoy this next podcast. Well, hey, everybody. Welcome back to another podcast episode of On the Other Hand. And I'm Jonathan, our other co-host.
I am also Jonathan. Yep, we're the Jonathans.
And we love to talk around a whole range of issues, topics, hot button topics, things that we know everybody is talking about. Not everybody knows or has confidence to communicate about. Yep. And today we have sort of a little different swing. We're going to be doing more of an interview style, go a little bit longer. And that's because we're talking about a topic that really is near and dear, not only to our hearts, but to Church on the Rock, and something that is important and critical mission-wise for our community, just because of our location, our geography, some of the unique circumstances that we face up here in Alaska. But we're talking about the issue of foster care and adoption. And of course, we're coming from a perspective that we really believe that the Bible teaches that adoption is something that, well, we've all been adopted. We've all been adopted into the family of God through faith. And so we have a high value for that. But specifically, you also, Jonathan, you have a high value for adoption. You've actually adopted. And so we just thought we'd take some time over the next couple episodes really to just discuss some of the issues that surround that, and today center in on just some of your personal story, you and Kitchery, as you've walked through this unique ministry, really, opportunity.
Yeah. I think to your point, I wouldn't even necessarily say that adoption, foster care, that whole ministry is unique to Alaska, right? If we were to look back, it was unique to the early church.
Oh, that's good,
right? That one of the things that these early followers of Jesus were known for was their willingness to take into their family others who were not part of their biological family, which was a significant need just culturally, right? But was also a significant need in terms of how children were viewed. And so this whole issue of infanticide, right? If you didn't like the gender of the child that you were, born, that was born to you, or if there was some reason you felt like they were cursed, it was within the realm of permissive and legal to leave them outside in order to be killed by the elements. And so the early church really was the one that embraced this mission of valuing life and then taking these children in.
Yeah, and you mentioned that it's the early church. I mean, it's James is where we hear widows and orphans, that this is true religion. Well, that's possibly, between James and Galatians, one of the first books written for us, included in the New Testament canon. Yep. And so you're talking about the first 10 years even of the early church. This emerges as a critical element of our value, how we view ourselves in relationship to our world and what we need to do about it to be on mission.
Yeah, it's interesting because for James to bring this up, James has a unique perspective, right? I mean, this is the brother half-brother
Right.
of Jesus. And so their father, right, has had to, Joseph has had to take in a child that he knew from the Spirit of the living God, right, heard from God, was not his biological child. And then for the rest of Jesus' siblings, they all experience this journey in life that has this unique tension in it when it comes to biological belonging. And James is clearly addressing this issue and saying, listen, pure and undefiled religion. In our culture, religion gets a bad rap. The term religion gets a bad rap, right?
Yeah.
But he says there is a pure and undefiled expression of love, devotion to God, and it involves caring for widows and orphans.
And that's actually a critical element in my story. Not everybody knows this, but my mother was stolen away in the middle of the night from Virginia, moved to California to get away from Dad. And in the process of that, several years later, Mom remarried. My grandma remarried another gentleman who was a logger and hard worker and a Christian. And that gentleman not just valued my mother as a little girl, but actually adopted her. Wow. And so this is a personal story for me, but also for you. In fact, I'll take this opportunity. Tell us a little bit about your story. Like, what were some of the factors that allowed you or moved you to get involved in the process of adoption?
Yeah, I think my wife and I, Kitri, I don't know that we ever had any overt aversion to adoption, but my wife comes from a large family, 11 kids in the family. And so from the time I met her until the time we were married, my value for a large family radically increased because I watched them interact with each other. While it had certainly its challenges, there was this real beauty, built-in friendship and camaraderie. And so we had every intention of having a large family when we got married. And so we got married in short order. Our son Caleb was born, got pregnant in that first year of marriage, and Caleb was born. And so when Caleb was born, it was in Homer, Alaska. We were living there at the time. And when he was born, there were some challenges, and the hospital that we were in did not know how to navigate them. We now know, right, years later, that there were other issues that compounded those challenges, who the doctor was and whatnot. But Caleb was born, he was taken via C-section, and in that whole process, Kitri almost died. In fact, it was real touch and go for a couple of weeks after that. But all of that being said, there was no technical or medical reason that we shouldn't be able to get pregnant again. But what we discovered is we weren't able to. And so for years, we tried, wrestled with the issues of infertility and all the challenges that come with that, and those moments where you're sitting on the couch, right, and Kitri's in tears, saying, I feel like I've been robbed of something I was supposed to have. The doctor who had performed the surgeries on her in the hospital during the C-section and subsequently, we discovered later it had numerous malpractice lawsuits.
And injustice had been done.
Yeah, and so she had that sense, that feeling like there should be these children sitting around me that I don't have, and we were not able to get pregnant again. And so we had started to look into adoption, but being in vocational ministry, adoption is expensive. Right, the lawyers involved and all of those sorts of things, and we just never could see a clear way forward. This was before people were GoFunding me for everything they wanted to do in life, right? And so, like, how can we come up with these funds to move this process forward? And so we've just never been able to really land on the right timing and the resources we would need. And then somebody brought up the idea to us of foster to adopt. And that was the first time we'd ever heard that term, and that there was an arm of foster care that was actually specifically designed to take these children that they believed were going to end up in the system indefinitely, that there was not going to be reunification with their biological parents for a whole host of reasons, and that you could enter in as a foster family with the intention of adopting. We had never even considered that or heard about it. And as soon as we did, we realized this is something we could do. Now, we didn't know all the ins and outs. We didn't know how different that would be from the adoption, journey versus foster care. There are some significant differences and challenges that are hardwired. But we felt like this is something that would be in the heart of God. It actually doesn't cost us anything financially to step into this, right? We can step in and be a safe home for a child with the intention of adopting if they become available for adoption. And so we said yes to that, and had no idea what to expect, right? Didn't know if we'd get a 14-year-old showing up at our house or if we'd have, an infant showing up. In fact, the very first child that came to us was a young Russian boy who did not speak English. And so we took him in. It was an emergency placement, and we're like, oh boy, here we go. What did we get ourselves into, right? And yet at the same time, very much felt like this was something that was in the heart of God, something we could do as a family, and felt like our son Caleb at the time was, I believe, 13, and something he had caught a vision for, he was wanting to be a part of, and so.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, as you're going through that process, foster care, and you're seeing what the Lord is doing, and He's opening your heart to things. He's giving you opportunities. You're saying yes to those opportunities. Describe the process of getting to that moment where you go, we love this child, or the situation is the right situation. This is the right framework. We can see the Lord working in this. This is the time to press go. This is the time to move forward and actually adopt. How did that all work out for you?
So that's the challenge inside of the foster care arena, and I think part of the reason that this topic specifically could be a hot topic, a button pushing topic, is people have very different experiences when it comes to a state institution, a federal institution, like Office of Children's Services, and so I recognize that when you step into that, you don't know who you're going to be working with. You don't know how the process is going to go. What we discovered immediately is that what you're describing was not actually our choice. When you step into foster care, what you're saying is, we will provide care for this child, a safe home for this child, while the state deliberately and intentionally works towards reunification with the biological parent. Now, you may know that this might not work out that way. Maybe they're in incarceration and they're going to be in incarceration for the next 20 years for some crime or whatever it is that brought that child into your home. You know at the outset that you do not have control over whether it will be your choice to adopt. And yet, in our case, you fall madly in love with, in particular, when you take an infant into your home, which the first 3 girls that we had placed in our home all came in as infants. And so you're not dealing with some of the behavioral issues that are overt, right? You have this significant level of empathy for a child. They don't know why they're in the situation they're in, why they're crying all night, the trauma they've experienced, all of those things. And so for us, having an infant come into our home, you're in love, day one, right? And you have to remind yourself frequently that I have no idea how this is going to turn out.
So how did that work for you? I mean, because if you have heartstrings, as some people call it, you're growing attached. In the back of your mind that this could be what would feel like as something's being wrenched away, right? How do you prepare your heart to work through that whole process?
That is
what did you guys do?
Really good question. So, and I've told numerous young foster families this, because there's a tendency to romanticize getting involved in this sort of thing. And I really caution people, because if the reason you're getting involved is for the feeling it generates for you versus the desire to do what's right by the child, you could actually do significant damage to your own family, and also to the future for this child. And so the state typically has a time frame in which they're supposed to work. It has been 18 months. They run an 18-month track to give every opportunity for reunification with the biological parents. But from there, they actually begin to explore a different set of options, right? From there, they explore immediate family, extended family, and then as a foster family, if you're not related to the child, as a foster family, you're usually the last one on the list to become the option. And so this is a grueling and gut-wrenching process. For Kitri and I, what I felt like the Lord very clearly said to me, this is one of those moments where in my heart, in my mind, I sensed the Lord saying something to me that has stuck with me verbatim to this day. And it's this, Jonathan, if you're going to say yes to this, you must be willing to have your heart broken over and over and over again, whether you adopt them or not. Mm-hmm. And so I knew coming in that there were going to be these moments where it looked like it was not going to go the way we wanted it to go, or everything in me was going to desire to vilify the biological parent and somehow degrade them or downplay them to my kids, right? To take ownership before it was my right to take ownership. And the Lord just said, listen, even in this process, your heart is going to break over and over. And if you're willing to allow that to happen, then say yes. And then the second thing was this. I must be willing to give all that I have for as long as I have them. And if it hurts like mad when they go away, then I probably love them well. Right? So the more painful it is, if and when they go to biological family, extended family, and it just rips my heart out, then I probably loved them well. But I could not, it was not allowed by the Lord to withhold love or affection in order to protect my own heart. I could give this kid, in the time frame we had, the gift of bonding, which means they could bond again with someone else in the future, right? Yeah. Even though it might not be me. That's sacrificial, right?
Yeah, that's what's so beautiful about that. And as you're describing that, the image of, in my mind, is, as the Lord has treated us, we treat others, and that it isn't this, I need to adopt. It's this, I've been adopted, and the Lord wants me to extend that, not for my benefit, but for somebody else's benefit. And so it takes that selfish motive, which we don't like talking about, but it can be there, and it can be in any of us, right? But it takes it, and it says, hey, reframe your heart around God's purposes here. And then, of course, we know from that point forward, everything works out really, really well, right?
Yep, it all goes perfectly. Once you have the right mentality, you get all the things you wanted, right? Yeah. So I'll tell you just a story to sort of highlight this. But first, for me, and I've said this for years, it continues to be true into this day. There is nothing that I have experienced or participated in my Christian life from the time I came to Christ at 19 years old, nothing I've experienced in my Christian life that has taught me more about the gospel than this journey. And yet, it has had significant challenges and joys. But in terms of understanding the Father's heart for me, understanding what it means when the Scriptures say it is by the Spirit of adoption that we call Him Dad, Father, Abba, I'll tell you what, hands down, has been the most educational and experiential for me in regards to my understanding of the gospel. And I cry a lot more these days than I ever have from the pulpit talking about the gospel, talking about this topic. But the story, our first girl that we took in, she came to us as an infant. We were in love from day one. There were a whole bunch of things that just seemed like they were divinely ordained. Everything from her name, her given name, to the joy that was in our home, our community surrounding us in this whole process. And so we were at the place where the state had concluded that the termination or relinquishment of the biological parents' rights was where we were at. We were at the midnight hour, right? We were on the cusp of being in the courtroom, celebrating the adoption day, the name change, all of those things. And she is part Alaskan Native. And at the midnight hour, the tribe that she was registered with decided to get involved. Now, they didn't get involved, what we discovered later, because they uniquely loved her or wanted her. Had she been brought into a village environment, she, just because of her appearance, would have been so clearly the outsider. Like, it would have been a really tough scenario. What we discovered later is that there was tension, there was conflict, a beef between the individual at the tribal level and the state OCS office. And so they picked a fight over our girl, right?
Wow.
And so we get word of this. We're days literally away from all of this being finalized after a long and grueling process. And they were crying out, the ICWA law, right? The Indian Child Welfare Act had come into play. And so we hear about this, and we're just devastated. Like, this could be a deal breaker. And so we begin to pray. We have all of our friends pray. And through that series of events, God just does a miraculous, like, my wife is praying that he will give dreams and visions to the tribal members. Over the course of those couple of days, this becomes apparent at the tribal level with that particular group. They recognize what's happening with this lady. They fire her. They replace her with a lady who has adopted children. They discover that I'm also American Indian, right? And so I fit inside of the tier of who can adopt in the ICWA, law. And all of this becomes apparent, and they end up showing up at our house with gifts. Sorry.
You just went deep.
Gifts for our girl, right?
Wow.
For our family, celebrating this adoption. But what I realize in that moment is it just as easily could have gone in an entirely different direction. And it's an ongoing reminder to me that what God has told me from the beginning, Jonathan, if you're going to say yes to this, you must be willing to have your heart tender, broken over and over again, if you want to join me in this journey. And the same thing's true in his affection for me, right? You think of Jesus on the cross looking out, and like, there's this deep affection and love for the people who are wounding him, right? Forgive them. They do not know what they're doing. And it's created a tenderness, a softness, which is not naturally how I am. I'm typically really black and white. But I would challenge families to not romanticize it. It can be an extremely painful journey.
But a shaping journey, and one where the Lord really is invested in, right? We know this is where
He meets you in it.
He works. This is where He works. So at some point you get your girls and you move on as a family into this new life where legally you are a bona fide family. What are some of the things that you've been able to rejoice in that process through the years, along with maybe what are some of the, if I'm out there and I'm thinking, hey, I've wondered about adoption. I know a lot of people listening might be praying about it even right now. Like, what are some of the things that you faced that you've worked through? Some of the triumphs that you've been able to experience that might be helpful in that process of thinking through this.
So, because it isn't like, hey, adoption day came. It was fun for us because we were in a community in Homer that we've been in for a long time. Right. So we had all these relationships, and so they pack out the courtroom, on our adoption day, and we've got these photographs that we have of our girls, and they all signed them, and they're actually hanging up in our house. These people who are cheering, for their future and success.
And if you haven't ever been a part of that, it's spectacular. It's amazing.
Yeah. It's you don't feel like you're in it alone,
Yeah.
right? But when it comes to the day-to-day, man, there can be some significant challenges. And in our next podcast, we're going to get sort of into the nuts and bolts and what I feel like is needed, what the church needs to do. But for us, I would say one of the greatest joys was our ability to work with the state office in our community to the degree that we have built relationships there where they call us, even to this day, to check in on our girls, to ask for our input for other foster families in that community. But there was a real trust and rapport that was built there with a state agency where we get the privilege of having some influence. And so that was a huge benefit. But the other one is this. Because of our willingness to walk with the biological families, both in relationship and visitations, and honoring that process, not vilifying them to the girls, those sorts of things, they were both willing to relinquish their rights rather than go to a painful and elongated termination trial. But with this stipulation, they both, in all three cases, said, we're willing to relinquish our parental rights only if the Walkers will adopt our girls, right? And so for us, that is an enormous gift we get to give our girls, right? We get to say them. In fact, my wife wrote a book after our first adoption. It's just a children's book with illustrations in it, and we just wrote it for our daughter to tell her the story of her adoption, how she came into our family, the things that God did, how He moved in the tribe, and that her biological mother so clearly stated that she wanted us to care for her. That is such a gift. Whether she ever ends up able to or does have contact with her in the future, she knows that her biological mom picked us to be her forever family.
So this feels more like provision, and as opposed to just, somebody dropped the ball because they didn't care. In fact, as you're describing that, I'm going backwards in our conversation to how you framed, as a couple, as a family, how you framed your hearts.
Yeah.
Seems to be a direct line to how it all turned out in this regard, where others were able to see motive, intention, desire, purity.
100%, because of what we fundamentally believe, regardless of what the facts may say in regards to where this is headed for the biological parent. Nope, they're never going to get out of their addiction. They're never going to get out of prison. They're never going to, whatever it is, right? But no matter how all of that seems, our desire to cheer for them, to say, no, it would be better for any kid for their biological family to be healthy and thriving, and to genuinely desire that, regardless of how it's actually going to turn out, is a critical gift to that kid, to that biological parent. And so that's a posturing of your heart that is gospel-centered, right? Like, if I don't believe that transformation is possible, I certainly shouldn't be a pastor, and I probably shouldn't be a Christian, right? Like,
right.
If this isn't feasible for everyone, no matter what their situation is currently, if I can't have that hope for them, which is really hard, because you don't want them, you love that kid, and it feels like your kid is being stolen, but they're God's kids, right? Yeah. And at the end of the day, if I can cheer for that, if I can celebrate that, then however it turns out, I've postured that kid to be able to thrive in the future, to bond in the future. And I'm not creating villains, all around. That isn't to say there aren't real issues that have to be addressed at a state level and at a personal level.
And really, we'll get a chance to talk about some of those. And again, if people are out there and they're just saying, hey, I'm asking these questions, thank you so much for sharing, we know there's more questions to be answered. There's more things to discuss about this particular topic. But what would you just desire to leave everybody with today as they listen to this that, is just kind of one of your major takeaways from the process that you and your wife have been through?
I think there are two things that have really been reshaped in me. One is it's within the realm of reason and possibility, and there are agencies that we partner with as a church, like Safe Families. But it's within the realm of reason and possibility that the church could eradicate the need for foster families in our own state, in our own cities. That if the church caught a vision for this and we're educating and equipping people, providing the support networks necessary, the church could actually meet the demand and dramatically reduce the amount of abuse that happens in foster homes, could dramatically reduce the exchanging, taking care of a kid for cash from the state, right? If the church just stepped up as a benevolent organization and said, we're going to take in children in need and keep them from ever entering the state system, which was never designed to nurture and care for children, right? The church could do that. And I think the church is called to do that. We can certainly do it at a local level. And the second thing is, I believe that not only is this central to the message of the gospel, everyone doesn't have to do the same thing, but everyone can do something in regards to foster care and adoption. That's sort of been our motto as a church for the past several years. Not everybody can do the same thing, but everyone can do something, whether it's respite care for a foster family, whether it's, providing meals, those kinds of things, or getting involved directly and fostering and adopting. Everyone can do something. I think it's in the heart of God. And so for the individual who's listening, right, and watching, what I would say to them is ask the Holy Spirit how you're to be involved, because it is part of the practice of the Christian life. And so there's a way to get involved with widows and orphans, right, the most vulnerable. And ask the Lord what that way is, and then step into it with courage, because He is going to meet you in it. I love Mother Teresa's perspective on if you want to be close to the heart of God, be close to the poor, right? Like, be close to the most vulnerable. Be in the trenches, in the gutters of Calcutta, right? Be there with them. If you actually, I think we often, in many Christian circles, run from conference to conference trying to get close to God. Listened worship album to worship album, trying to get close to the heart of God. I can just tell you for a fact now, having been walking this piece out for many years, you want to be close to the heart of God? Get involved in what God's heart is passionate about. And this is one of those areas for sure.
He'll reveal Himself.
He will reveal Himself. So,
man, thank you for sharing your story, and looking
glad
forward
I kept it together.
Yeah,
mostly.
And it's so intensely personal, and like you said, that is an accurate reflection of how the Lord thinks about us, His emotion even towards us, and maybe somebody out there just needs to hear that.
Yeah.
Jesus loves you that much. And we're out of time for this one, but we hope that you will circle back around next week, as we'll be bringing the same topic up again from a little bit different perspective and walking through some of the obstacles and challenges that you might face as you pray about this. It just occurred to me before we close, it's just so interesting. We often pray, Lord, show me your will. Like, what is it that you're doing? And here's one where we can just say safely and definitively, God is in this. Right. We can participate.
Yeah, it's so good. I often think, what's the Lord saying back when we pray those prayers? Like, God, reveal yourself to me, or show me your will. And He's like communicating back, I'd love to. Show me some action, right? I'm waiting to meet you out on the field of battle. And like you said, and we've been talking about, not everybody has to do the same thing.
Right.
Don't let someone else tell you how you have to be involved, right? That's between you and the Lord. But the fact that we must be involved is inescapable.
Excellent. And we know that many that are listening to this are involved already. In fact, we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear your story, and you can share that with us through podcast. at churchak.org.
And
Questions, comments, please engage with us there. Also, we'd love for this to get out to as many people as possible, so you can just share our YouTube. We'd love for you to subscribe to that channel and follow us. So we'll see you next week on another episode of On the Other Hand.